Good morning. Thank you for attending this talk. Do you know that it wasn't the iceberg that sank the Titanic? And the events of that fateful evening have created a syndrome that still affects us today, especially when it comes to dealing with change. On April the 12th, 1912, the Titanic, which at the time was deemed the biggest moving object, it was deemed unsinkable, left Southampton en route to New York. And on April the 14th, just before midnight, at Titanic, within 3 hours it sank, taking with it 1,500 crew and passengers, about 2/3 of the total number of people that were on board. But it wasn't the iceberg that sank the Titanic. So what did? Firstly, they dismissed all the warnings. The radio operator that was on duty received 6 separate messages from different ships notifying them that there were icebergs in the area. And he was so busy sending out messages on behalf of the first-class passengers to their friends and acquaintances in New York, notifying them of their time of arrival, that he actually told the other ships' radio operators to please shut up and leave him alone because he was looking after his most important clients. The second reason is because they weren't prepared. 2 days after the Titanic was fully fitted, it spent only 12 hours in open water, practicing how fast it could go, how quickly it could stop, and what its turning capability was. In no time during those 12 hours, or in the 7th day leading up to its first voyage, any time on the voyage with any emergency evacuation procedures practiced. The third reason was that they relied on past successes. The commander who was in charge of the Titanic that night wasn't the captain, but he was a very experienced sailor. He was very level-headed, and in a previous incident where he was on board another ship, which was about to be rammed by another oncoming ship, he took control of the ship, overrode the captain's commands, and instructed the pilot of the ship to turn hard port fast. The ship slid to the left, narrowly missing the oncoming ship. On the night of the accident with the Titanic, he gave exactly the same instruction to the pilot of the Titanic, and as the pilot slid to the left, slid past the Titanic, which tore a hole into 6 of its watertight compartments, which began the sinking process. And lastly, or not lastly, the fourth reason is that they didn't have the right equipment. 2 of the sailors were placed in the crow's nest 90 feet above the ship's deck. It was a clear night. They were told to look out for icebergs, but the one piece of equipment that they didn't have, which I'm sure you'd all expect them to have, is binoculars. There were binoculars on board. There were binoculars on board, but they were locked up in a storage, and the sailor or the commander who had the keys to the storage facility wasn't on board the ship. However, there were other officers on board the ship who had keys, but nobody gave the executive decision to unlock the storage and give the 2 sailors who were on lookout the binoculars. One of the sailors that were in the crow's nest that night actually survived the Titanic, and he said on record that if they had been given binoculars, they would have probably spotted the iceberg in time and avoided the accident. Of course, we have to talk about the iceberg. The iceberg was there, and it played its part. However, the iceberg was in its natural environment. It was in the North Atlantic. It was in 0 temperatures. The currents and the wind direction had put the iceberg in its path. However, the crew of the Titanic dismissed the warnings. They were told there were icebergs in the area. They weren't prepared. They hadn't practiced, which, if they had, probably could have saved more lives. They relied on the past successes. The sailor who was in charge made exactly the same decision as he did previously for a completely different incident. And lastly, they didn't have binoculars. They didn't see it in time. All of these points, these 4 points, coupled with arrogance, contributes to a syndrome which still affects us today, which is called Titanic syndrome. And that is when we are confronted with a challenge or an obstacle, we fail to anticipate the changes needed, we fail to design the changes needed, and we fail to implement the changes needed. And the result is stagnation, collapse, or failure. And it's applicable to organizations as well as individuals. It's when we
are so arrogant that we dismiss the warnings, we're not prepared, we rely on past successes, and we don't have the right equipment when having to deal with oncoming icebergs or challenges. And unfortunately, the outcome is not usually in our favor. The thing about icebergs in our life is that they are all around us. On a global scale, we have increased global tensions. We have economic and political uncertainty. We have climate shifts. We have pandemics. And we have the increased speed at which information is coming at us and we have to deal with. On a closer point of view, closer to us, we have the effects of social media. We have retirement. We have the varying generational gaps that have different expectations and communication skills. And of course, now we have AI. These are all icebergs that are within our eyesight, within our horizon, circling around us. And it seems like they are coming at us much quicker, much faster, and they are much bigger. So much so that we are living in an era now which is called hyper-disruption, where just as we felt like we've dealt with one iceberg, there's another one, and then there's another one, and we don't revisit the state of normality which we were used to when the waters were much calmer and we were able to carry on with our life. There was a study done in 2020 when they mapped out the lifespan from the past of Fortune 500 companies. And up until the 1970s, before most of us were born, the lifespan of a Fortune 500 company was 70 years. And the reason being was because there was less competition. There wasn't that much information, wasn't coming at us that quickly, and it was quite difficult to upskill. We had to go to an institution to upskill. Then in the 80s, two things happened. There was globalization, and there was the advent of the internet. And with that, the lifespan of a Fortune 500 company before they had to pivot, adapt, reinvent themselves, came down to 15 years. A recent study has shown that a lifespan of a company, or a company now has to pivot anything between every 2 to 5 years, just to remain competitive and to remain in the market. And I know I'm talking about Fortune 500 companies and big organizations that have very long decision-making processes, and they're quite colossal to change. However, a couple of months ago, I was chatting to a production company owner who was telling me that they had to pivot around 6 times in the last 2 years just to remain competitive. That is the rate at which we are now having to change. I want to tell you a bit of a personal story. Besides being a transformational coach and trainer, I've also been in the film production industry and the stills production industry in Cape Town for the last 20-25 years. And these are the icebergs that I've noticed over that time period. It started out in the late 90s when we were still shooting on film, and at the end of each day the photographer would take their film to the lab and they would get the film clipped. They would cut 1 or 2 frames and they would instruct the lab to process just the clips of the film. And about 3 or 4 hours later, or the next morning, we'd go back to the lab, the photographer would look at the clip and they would process the rest of the film according to how they wanted, what the clip came out. At the end of the shoot, the photographer would go back to Europe, because that's where most of the clients came from, with bags of film, analog film. And at the time, production companies were very structured in what they offered. TVC production companies offered TV commercial production. Stills production companies offered film for photographic production. There was very, very little cross-pollination, and life was much slower. The whole processing period took about 18 to 24 hours just to have a look at the end result of the day's shoot. Then the first iceberg to appear was 2011, when the world all of a sudden was threatened with global terrorism. Four airplanes flew into the trade towers in America and the likes, and all of a sudden we lived in fear. And people didn't want to travel anymore because it was harder to travel. We didn't know if it was safe anymore. And the Europeans didn't go to Miami anymore. They didn't want to go to Miami, and Miami almost shut down. But Cape Town, excuse the pun, boomed during this time. All of a sudden, the Europeans were coming here. And we had a shortage of locations, we had a shortage of lighting companies, we had a shortage of studios, we had a shortage of auxiliary service companies. But Cape Town adapted and we blossomed, and all of a sudden there was more locations available, there were more productions available, there was more restaurants available. Cape Town really adapted and thrived, or this industry thrived. After that, with warning, we had digital photography. And what happened in Cape Town? Labs closed down. People lost their jobs even though we were warned. And the interesting thing was, at the time, Kodak, which was one of the best performing Fortune 500 companies, went out of business. And why? Because they were afflicted with Titanic syndrome. We were warned of digital photography. They weren't prepared. They relied on their past results and they didn't have the right equipment. However, Fuji, which at the time was Kodak's biggest competitor, saw the writing on the wall, adapted, changed, reinvented, pivoted, and they are now still in business as one of the biggest digital camera equipment manufacturers and suppliers around the world. After digital photography, we had load shedding, and we were plunged into darkness, and we were getting emails from Europe: can we come to Cape Town? Are we going to be able to work during the day? Are we going to be able to see at night? And what did we do? We adapted. All of a sudden there were generators on set, there were generator trucks parked outside, there was solar paneling. We shifted, we reinvented, we created a new reality so that we could work. And after that, 2008, we had the global recession, and the world was plunged into a mindset of scarcity. And the Europeans again, can we afford to come? What did the production companies do? They adapted. All of a sudden, they weren't just a TVC production company or a stills production company. They piggybacked off each other, and they created a package that was more affordable and more attractive for the clients to come out here, shoot both kind of formats at one time, on the same location, on the same day. And for us, in the production world, it became more stressful. More logistics were needed, bigger locations were needed, more time frames, more crew. But we adapted. And then, just when we thought that was over, COVID. And the world was locked up in their offices, and nobody wanted to, we couldn't travel. Nobody wanted to travel, nobody could travel in it. And it really, literally brought the production industry to its knees. But what did we do? We created remote shooting, where people could stay in Europe, we'd have a small number of crew on set, we would live stream it for them, and they would make in-time decisions about the shot count and the shot value, so that they didn't have to leave the safety of their homes or their offices. And production companies gave up their office space in Cape Town, and they worked from home. We started to work remotely. We adapted. The thing is that the ones that were afflicted by the Titanic syndrome and didn't move with the times are no longer here. The ones that did change and did adapt are still around and flourishing and enjoying the fruits of their adaptability. They changed. So let's talk about change for a moment, because there's a couple of misconceptions, and the one misconception is that we fear change. If I had to ask, just by show of hands, who of you are scared of change, or a bit aware or nervous of change? Okay. Okay, thank you for being so honest. The thing about change is that we don't fear it. We have adapted our whole lives. It's been a part of us since we were born. We first crawled, then we walked, then we ran. Then we went to primary schools, and when we went to primary schools, we had to deal with new teachers who instructed us in a different way, and we had to engage with different friends in a new environment. And then we went to high school, and the same thing happened. We went to a different environment, learned differently. We started out learning with pens and papers, and then COVID hit, and we learned online, and now it's blended learning, and now we learn from YouTube and webinars and blogs. And as we grew older, our values changed, our beliefs changed, our ideas changed, our influences changed, our fashion sense changed, our hairstyles changed. Some of us have lived in different cities, different neighborhoods, different countries. We've adapted to those realities. We've tried different food. As we've grown older, we've wanted different experiences. Adaptability and change is about who we are. It makes up who we are. Where the fear comes in is that the older generations, who are used to the 70-year lifespan of an organization, they have a different reality, and it was fed to us from a young age: go to school, go to college, get a job, stay in your lane, be safe. But their reality is completely different, because now, or in their time, the need to change was less frequent. We had a longer reaction time, and there was much more warning before it had to happen. Now, the need to change and adapt is coming at us thick and fast. The icebergs are lining up on our horizon. The thing about change is that it is hard. It is hard. And the reason being is because as we grow older, we become more risk averse. We become set in our ways, we're comfortable in our comfort zones, and to change, we need to step out of our comfort zones. We need to take action and move. It's disruptive. We have to learn, we have to unlearn the skills that we have, and we have to learn new skills to deal with this ever-changing world that is coming our way, especially because of the speed of which information is coming our way. It's also more difficult to discern what is truth, what is untruth. And lastly, it's annoying. Change costs money, and it takes time. All of these make change not an easy thing to deal with. However, change is a part of us, and it is always going to be a part of us. It's how we relate to it. Are we going to be afflicted with Titanic syndrome, bury our heads in the sand and hope for the best? Or are we going to engage with change? So now I've gone through the whole series of the glass half full, and I've painted the grey picture. How do we deal with change? The foundation, I believe, for dealing with change is made up of three components. One is leadership, secondly is creativity, and the third is the need to play. And I'm going to go through all of these, and then I'm going to actually, to end off, I'm going to give 7 steps of how we can engage with implementing much needed change. But to start off with, let's talk about leadership. Leadership is not a position applicable to a select few. If you're a production company owner, or you're a department head, or you're an AE, or you're middle management, or you're in an organization in some leadership position, that's just a title. Leadership is a set of skills that can be developed by all, and if we take the time to develop them and put them into action, we are able to contribute to ourselves, we are able to contribute to those around us, and we are able to contribute to the organizations in which we are working in a positive way. There are skills that can be developed, and if we do so, we are able to lead our way through life as opposed to just managing with it. We are able to deal with adaptability, and we take responsibility for being a part of the change that is needed as opposed to just playing the victim. And if you have a look at these skills, there's about 12 or so. There are 1 or 2 more that I would sometimes add, but all of these can be developed. But it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes us stepping out of our comfort zone. But it's one of the key components of dealing with adaptability. The second component is creativity. You know, here we are at Fame Week, and I was walking around this morning, and I was absolutely blown away by the stalls and the people and what's going on in the makeup room. It just oozes creativity. But here's the question: what is the definition of being creative? How do you define creativity? Creativity is to make a connection. It's to be able to look at 1 or 2 or 3 things and make something better from that which already exists. To give an example, Steve Jobs from Apple, when he was still alive, he created the iMac and the laptop, and it was amazing. The screen was great, the design was fantastic, it was really fast. However, at the beginning, it was quite a cumbersome computer. Even the laptop was quite a heavy thing to carry around. And then what did he do? He created the smartphone. And the smartphone was amazing. It could fit into your pocket, it was really cool, it was fast, but the screen was a little bit small, and you know, somebody with fat fingers, a little bit of a struggle to type with and the like. So what did he do? He made the connection between something too small, something too big, and he created the iPad. That's one of the aspects of creativity in action. It's looking around to see how we connect 1 or 2 things. The second aspect of creativity is to solve a problem. It's to find a solution to a problem. And I will argue with anybody, but every one of us here, everybody around is creative. You don't have to be an exhibiting artist or a published author to be deemed creative. We are all creative. We are all able to solve problems. The secret is to tap into our uniqueness and see where our strengths and our talents lie so that we can see where our problem-solving skills lie. But we are all creative, and creativity is about solving a problem. The third aspect is that it's the ability to create something out of nothing. An artist or an entrepreneur has a vision in mind, and they have their blank canvas, and they go about manifesting and creating this reality or this vision. And how do they do that? By solving problems, by making connections, by learning from past mistakes along this journey until their end result is what they want. But at the end of the day, it's just about solving a problem, and it's about making the connections until we are able to manifest our visions. And lastly, this is creativity. It's to transform, pivot, change, adapt, reinvent, everything of which I'm talking about now. And the reason I bring this up is because when we are confronted with the need to adapt, we have to adapt, we have to change, all of a sudden it affects our levels of stress and our levels of anxiousness, which is really detrimental to the creative flow. So my suggestion here is when we are feeling a bit anxious about having to change or adapt, just change the language. We're not changing, we're not adapting, we're not pivoting, we're just going to be more creative. And all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more lighthearted, and it becomes a little bit more of an adventurous journey. It is creativity in action, to pivot, to adapt, to transform, to reinvent. Okay, so how do we be creative? This is what's needed for us to be creative. We need to step out of our comfort zone. We need to be brave. We need to be prepared to be wrong. We need to try new things. And the thing about that, the challenge is that it's frowned upon to be wrong. When we were at school, you had a test and you had a right answer and you had a wrong answer. And if the answer was right, you passed. And if the answer was wrong, you failed. So much so that it has stunted our ability and our bravery to be prepared to be wrong and to try new things. But if nothing changes, everything stays the same. And for innovation to take place, we have to make mistakes. We have to learn from our mistakes. It really is important. We have to be vulnerable. You know, the Latin word for vulnerable actually means to be wounded. And for us to be creative, we have to be prepared to be wounded. Our egos are going to take a hit. People might judge us, people might laugh at us, people might talk behind our backs about the things that we are trying to do, especially when we're wrong. We need to be open to that, knowing that we are going to learn from the mistakes and we're going to implement an alternative idea. And lastly, we need to collaborate. We're living in a time now where it's not that alien to collaborate and how important collaborations are. People, organizations are even collaborating with their competitors now, having conversations with them to create a bigger entity and a better entity out of competing with somebody else. The thing about collaboration is if you are going to collaborate, it needs to be quite a defined ethos, somebody or an organization with a similar value, similar vision, similar work ethic, so that you can work cohesively as opposed to struggling and going off in different directions and ego fighting with each other because you think you're right. It's not always easy, but it is quite a crucial component. So that's the second component to the foundation. We had leadership and we had creativity. And now we have play. Okay. And it's funny, whenever I give a talk or I do a workshop or a program and I say to the audience, you need to play more, I can see. It's like, you want me to play more. I've got this deadline and I've got to be this productive and I've got to produce this result and I've got to take my kids to school, I've got to take my kids to extramural activities, and then I get home and my partner wants me to do house stuff and they want my time. Where do I have time to play? Play is crucial. There are so many studies coming up about the importance of play that it's becoming one of the key aspects about us moving forward. So to start off with, what is it to play? To play is to do something because we can. It has absolutely no purpose. It's to go surfing with your friends because the waves are good and you can, but without wanting to be the best surfer in the water. It's about being able to go fly a kite with your kids on the beach. It's about sitting at home and doing a crossword or doing a little drawing in a book or taking down notes or listening to music or being part of a music club or being part of a book club. It really is that important. And why? There's 3 reasons. The first is that when we were children, we learned by play. Our parents didn't say to us, here's a gift, I want you to play with it and then write down the 6 data points of what you learned. We took the toy or the box or a piece of paper and we played with it. And we tried new things. And we were not scared of being right or wrong because there were so many options. We took the box and we tore a hole in it. It could have been a little go-kart, and then it could have been a fort, or it could have been a doll's house. We played and we played and we played without having a project or a specific outcome in mind. And we were energized and we smiled and we were having fun and we engaged with our friends. And what happened because we played? We developed our cognitive skills, we developed our social skills, and we developed our creative and our imaginary skills. All because we played. We just did things because we could. The second reason why play is important is it promotes creative inspiration. And I'm going to give an example. I'm sure you've all remember a time when you sat down for an exam at school and you read a question on the exam paper and you knew the answer, but for the life of you, you couldn't think of the answer right then. And the more you thought about that answer, or what the answer was, the more stressed you became, the more anxious you became, and you couldn't answer that question. And then the bell rang for the end of the exam and you got up and you walked home, or you were on the bus home, or you were in the shower, or you were on the loo, or you were on the beach, and the answer came to you. It's because you were in a relaxed state of mind. And what happens is play induces a relaxed state of mind, and what happens then is our conscious mind relaxes and we access our subconscious mind, and that's where the answers lie. That's where the problem solving skills lie. That's where the making the connections apps apply. It's about being relaxed. Also because it makes us feel good. Play contributes to our well-being. When you're having fun and you're laughing and you're joking and you're doing something because you can, you are light-hearted, it's releasing all the feel-good chemicals and hormones. And the importance of that is we're living in a stressful world with all these icebergs around us, but at the end of the day, the most important person to deal with that without being selfish is ourselves. And if we become stressed about it, if we become anxious about it, it affects our mental health. We become depressed, we could become addictive, we can become quite isolated, we can feel the loneliness and the isolation. If we play, it releases the feel-good hormones and it enables us to deal with the challenges and everything else that life throws at us. We loved playing as children. We need to find the time now to play more because we still learn, because it inspires creativity, and because it is good for us and we owe it to ourselves. So these are the 3 foundations. Leadership, personal leadership, taking the responsibility. We are all creative, just change the language. And lastly, the need to play because it's important. So as mentioned, there's 7 components that you can put into action now that will help us all deal with the need to adapt and these icebergs that are on our horizon. The first one is have conversations around it. If you as a person or you within an organization feel the need to change or just want to engage with people about change, have conversations. Have a circle of trust or an adaptability circle or clan to have conversations. My suggestion to you here is that when you have conversations, and it can be with your clients, it can be with your competitors, especially within an organization, is engage with people that you wouldn't usually speak to from a different department. And the reason being is because we all view the world through different lenses. And people in different departments in an organization, the experience within that organization is different, their experience in dealing with the clients is different, and they will have different experiences to what you do, and they see the world through different lenses. And the more lenses that you are able to focus on a problem, the bigger the chance of finding a solution to it. So engage with unlikely people. The second thing is, I'm talking about change and I'm talking about all these icebergs, and it can become quite stressful. I remember when I started studying all of this, when we were talking about change, I was like, what do I have to change to? What do I have to do? What do I have to become? And it becomes stressful. The starting point is keep it close to your competitive advantage. And what I mean by that is it's not only within an organization with your product offering or the likes, but keep it close to what your values are, your vision is, what your beliefs are, what your ideas are, and take a step out from that if a change needs to happen. And the changes, even though I'm talking about icebergs, they don't have to be colossal changes. Within an organization, it might be a small tweak to a product line or a website or a marketing strategy or an automation strategy or some form of upskilling that might apply to you or to one of your staff members. Keep it small. Don't be overwhelmed. Just take the small steps away from the center, but just make it consistent. The third option, or the third suggestion, is limit your options. I don't know if any of you have been in a brainstorming session at work, or you've done sort of a to-do list and you come down with like a list of 16, or you've got 16 post-its on your wall and nothing gets done. Nobody ever engages with the ideas that have come up with. You want to know why? Because our minds fear failure. So what happens is you have your 16 post-its on the wall, but you've got too many choices. So what you need to do, my suggestion is you bring that down to 2 things to begin with. And the reason being is when you only have 2 things, the mind has 50% chance of success, 50% chance of failure. If you have 3 choices, you've only got 33.33% chance of success. And if you've got 4 things within your mind, there's only a 25% chance of success. So the more choices we have, the more debilitating it becomes for us to take the first step. So limit your options. The 4th and 5th suggestions go together. Think of it as a process. It's not a project. And you can use emergent strategy as opposed to deliberate strategy. And how those work together is that in the time frame when organizations had a 70-year lifespan, when it came to strategy, they knew where they were and they knew where they were going to get to, but they would goal set and they would strategize and they would plan everything out before they took the first step. Everything was planned and it had its markers. However, because we're living in a time where change is needed so quickly, there's something called emergent strategy. So what we do with that is we see the whole thing as a process. We take one of the suggestions from the post-its and we just run with it. And what we do is we explore it and we try it and we engage with it, but then we have quick markers when we review what the success rate and the data was. So instead of this long-winded journey, they're very short and sharp journeys where we're reviewing the data consistently to see if we're on the right track or if we need to change direction. Think of it as a process. What can I learn from this? How can I play with this? The motto was, life is not about the destination, it's about the journey. And this is where it applies. It's about the journey. What can I learn from it? What are the data points that I can use moving forward? The 6th, make it part of your organizational strategy or your organizational culture. You want to get fitter, you want to get healthier, you want to lose weight, we go to gym, we run on a consistent basis. The same thing needs to happen here. If we are wanting to engage with adaptability and learn how to reinvent and transform, it must become part of our organizational culture. We need consistent meetings about it so we can have conversations. They don't have to be these long-winded strategy meetings. It's just engaging with it to have brainstorming sessions and get ideas from people, friends, family, or within your organization, but it should be on a regular basis. Second last is growth mindset. There's been books about it, there's been TED Talks about it, there's been webinars about it, and basically for those of you that don't know, you have these icebergs on the horizon. Are they a challenge? Are they an obstacle? Are they something that we're going to be stressed about? Or is there something that we can possibly learn from? Are there going to be opportunities from which we can grow? Can we play with it and engage with it and engage also with the outcome? Knowing that we can change to learn more. That's what growth mindset is. And lastly, continuous training and development. You can take on coaches and trainers. You can look at YouTube clips. You can watch webinars. You can read blogs. You can engage in whatever format of learning that is comfortable with you and your organization. But we are now in that phase of continuous growth and development because change is happening so quickly and so fast around us. So in closing, you know, this is the age-old saying, adapt or die, and it is still applicable, especially if you tap into Titanic syndrome, but it is quite dark and it is quite cynical, but it is a reality. However, I think I'd like to just change it slightly, and that is adaptability leads to us learning, it leads to us growing, it leads to us creating, it leads to us flourishing. But the choice comes down to us as unique individuals. Are we going to engage with Titanic syndrome, bury our heads in the sand and hope for the best? Or are we going to engage with adaptability, not fear it, learn what is needed for us to engage and just grow with it? Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.